because it will be legal for recreational marijuana in Minnesota.
It's August 1st is the start date, but you probably won't see retail places set up until probably a year and a half. It's going to take a little bit of time to build out that retail infrastructure. But I want to say that, this bill was done the right way. We looked at a lot of the other states. We saw what they did right. We saw what they did wrong. And we tried to make sure we weren't going to do that. We also really tried to make sure that it's a Minnesota industry. We don't want big cannabis coming in from other states and dominating. So there's a lot of provisions in there to make sure that it's homegrown.
State Senator Rob Kupec, District 4. How you been? Welcome.
Tired and busy and, just trying to keep track of exactly what day it is.
And I was saying off air that crash that happens for those individuals that first couple of days afterwards. It's go, go, go. Done, and then all of a sudden, okay, you're so used to being on the go, committees, phone calls, emails. It's a weird transition. And this is your first time out there. How's it been?
It is because you are constantly like checking your emails and the box was very, very minimal today. So yeah. it was on one hand, it's a relief. On the other hand, you're like, oh, this is a slightly, you have to adjust to that.
Yeah, and it takes a little bit. And then it's summertime too, so that'll help. It'll ease right back into the lake mode, perhaps. But this session has been talked about not just regionally, but nationally, about what was accomplished, what was done with a very, I would say, thin majority that the DFL had. I mean, you had a 1-vote majority in the Senate there, and the items that were passed are pretty eye-popping, Senator.
It is. Part of the mandate, I think we were told was, the last session, people felt like nothing was really done. And we were told to do something. So I think we really took that to heart. We did an awful lot.
You did. And I'm going to allow people to text in their thoughts to 35270. So we'll start off, this being your first session. Then I want to go through some of those things done because, with that thin majority, there was a lot of lobbying going on. We heard it on KFGO throughout the entire session. Ads during session that were descriptive that I've never heard before. But this is your first time. Just describe it. Any surprises after you got elected? Clearly, you knew about the job. You wanted the job. You asked for it. You got it.
Right.
Any surprises in this first term here?
I would say a couple of things. First of all, and maybe it is partly just this session, the workload was staggering. I mean, I knew you would be busy, but, I think we had a very aggressive agenda, and it was an unbelievably large workload. So that was the first thing. The second thing is it's always interesting how everything, even though they're not related, everything's interconnected. Yeah. Bills, people bringing those bills, lobbyists on bills, how it relates, everything can kind of get tied up all in one. Things you wouldn't think about being connected or somehow, connected in some way, shape, or form. So that was it. And then I think the third thing is how fast you made friends. And you're here, you're doing big work on things. And most of my career, I've spent working by myself. And whether you're out in the studio by yourself, sure, you're by yourself.
You and that radar.
Yes, I was a root salesman. I was by myself in a car. But, you're thrown together. And that camaraderie, I think, with fellow senators was really something special.
And that'll be with you forever.
Yes.
Now, it really will because, it's that group that, thick and thin, you're getting the same emails either praising or dogging on you. And you know what? We're working together because it's long hours. I mean, you adjourned at 2 a.m. somewhere in there as far as finishing up in some of these final stages just because there was so much debate back and forth and committee work to get done.
Right. We had one session last week that went till 6 in the morning. So it's like, come out to sunrise on the Capitol. Yeah. Haven't seen that one yet.
Yeah,
so
I've never seen the sunrise from a Capitol, just probably from apartment dwelling in college, but that's a lifetime ago. We don't need to rehash that. Let's rehash some of what was accomplished and some of the back and forth because, I'm looking at the budget being, a pretty staggering amount, but good or bad or otherwise. When we're talking about a $72 billion budget, you've got paid family leave, which was a hot item. You've got Social Security tax was one thing. I don't even know where to begin because there's so many. So I kind of put it up on a tee for you. What's the biggest accomplishment you think was done in this session?
Wow. I mean, it's funny. You're always thinking about what you've done recently. I mean, the bonding bill was an unbelievable amount of money. There's been so much pent-up demand for bonding, particularly in greater Minnesota, because one hasn't been done in so long, and the ones that have been done have been fairly small. So I think in some ways that'll have some of the greatest impact, particularly a lot of those smaller communities that have water issues. There's so many small cities that need water or have water infrastructure problems, and there's a lot of money that'll be going to those cities to help with that. So I think that's one of the big things. I think the tax, the actual tax bill has about $4 billion in tax relief, and I don't think that has necessarily been talked about quite as much because of all the other things going on, because of the legalization of marijuana and paid family medical leave and some of the other bills. But the tax bill has $4 billion in tax cuts in it.
Well, the minority is pointing out that, hey, you're raising taxes out here and not enough in tax cuts. And so walk us through, because that's what they're out there saying. Of course, every post session you have the majority minority, and it sounds like you weren't even sure in the same hallways, right? And what the description of these. And, of course, you had the House, the Senate, you got the governorship here. So explain why they're wrong in characterizing, hey, you didn't do enough on tax cuts.
Okay, so a lot of the tax cuts are geared towards people who don't make quite as much money. And when I say not as much money, I'm talking $130,000 or less. So I mean, we're not talking really low end. We're talking, middle class folks. And there are some tax increases in there, but those are all geared towards some of the higher end earners and some corporate taxes. So there are some tax increases. There are some, they're not wrong about this, that do affect, you and I, because the gas tax.
Sure.
So, it's kind of going to be a wash, because there's this minimum markup on gasoline. We got rid of that. That was actually a Republican bill. We said that's a good idea. We got that. So there's no minimum markup. So that may save you about 8 cents. And then because transportation is in such dire need of funding, and the problem is that gas tax revenue has been going down. We're driving less. We're driving more fuel efficient vehicles. We have more electric vehicles. So we indexed it in. And so it's estimated that in about 4 years from now, you may see a 5 cent increase over those 4 years. So not a huge increase, and it should be washed basically by this getting rid of this minimum markup on gasoline. And then there will be, and there was a lot of back and forth on this delivery fee.
Okay, yeah, explain this to me, because in full disclosure, the other day when I'm talking about the gas tax, I'm like, okay, I can understand that.
Right.
The new delivery fee, the issue I take is, okay, if I'm a business guy, how am I going to get this work? Okay, well, this is $101, so now all of a sudden I'm getting assessed a fee. How do I report that? So that's where I was coming from, saying, was it necessary? Explain to me why I'm wrong.
So here's the thought behind it. Okay. The thought behind it is, we're going to need, going forward, to figure out how to replace the gas tax as we get more electric vehicles, and we're getting more delivery vehicles that are on the road. Our roads still are getting used. So the idea, and the original idea, was a 75-cent tax fee on every delivery. So if you got a pizza, you paid 75 cents. And a lot of us just went, what? That's nuts.
Yeah, if I'm at MSUM and I just needed a pizza.
Right. And
I'm a poor college kid, man.
Right. And particularly in rural areas, a lot of rural people depend more on these deliveries.
Sure.
But the fact is, those do have to go over some roads. So a bunch of us kind of went, we're not so keen on this. You need to come back and think this over. And so what they've done with this delivery fee is they've exempted food, medical supplies, things like that, baby supplies. Those will not have anything. And the fee will be, and it's reduced to 50 cents, and it's on anything that's over $100. Yes, is that $100 turn on, turn off thing kind of wonky? Sure. But sometimes you're like, I think for simplicity, having to try to, stretch that out. And it's not a percentage, so you could order $1,000 worth of stuff.
I'm going all in on that.
You'd still pay 50 cents. So it's 50 cents on deliveries over $100, exempting a wide variety of things. And it's just to try, and it's dedicated straight towards roads. It's not going to go towards anything else. It goes straight towards transportation.
So much to talk about, you don't even know where to begin. So you can steer us in a direction. For example, Tyler, can you ask Senator Rob Kupec what the Social Security tax change is?
Sure. So I had run on totally eliminating the Social Security tax. And I spent a lot of time this session trying to get that done. In the end, we only got it to $100,000. So if you're a couple, you make $100,000 or less, you will pay no Minnesota state tax on Social Security. That one is indexed up to $140,000. So anybody who's making $140,000 to $100,000 in retirement, you will have a reduction in your Social Security tax. So I had my kind of day on the floor. It was a 3-hour bruising, beating thing. What I proposed, because it's interesting how this works. So there's a lot of people who are probably in the Democratic Party to my left who don't want to see that tax go away on Social Security. I think they're wrong about that. I think it's a fairness issue. You pay tax on that once. You shouldn't be paying tax on it again. But with Social Security tax, as more and more people retire, that if you eliminate that, it does in the out years continue to grow as less revenue coming into the state. And people on the left are like, we really want other things we want to do with that, and we don't want to see that money go away. I made the fairness argument. So my solution was, okay, I will propose something that is revenue neutral to eliminate the tax on Social Security and shift it to investment income over $250,000. Still, some people on the left were like, well, wait, we could also, I'm like, tax that. So they didn't want to do it. I got 20-something of my fellow Democrats to come along. But then Republicans were like, well, no, we don't want to tax rich people to replace. I mean, those rich people would still get a cut on their Social Security tax. They also would not pay the tax on it, but they wouldn't go along with it either. So I had from both sides. I tried to carve out this middle way, and it failed. But 76% of Minnesotans will not pay anything on Social Security tax and state tax. So there is a big savings there. It went up from I think it was 55,000 was what it was before. Now it's 100,000. So we made a big stride. We still got a few years left. We can try this again in 2 years.
Stuck in the middle is what comes to mind. And the people on the far left are wrong on this. They are
wrong on this one. It's a fairness issue. It really is a fairness issue.
Yeah,
I mean, you can argue that somebody, yes, you're making over $200,000 a year in retirement. You could pay the little bit of tax on that, but it is actually a fairness issue.
As you point out, this is already something it's funded through taxes you already paid.
Right, exactly.
And that's what, during the session, I was talking to Governor Walz about this, just of you're overcomplicating things here. Yes. For Democrats that are going to be running, that did run on this saying eliminate it all, they're going to run for re-election again likely at some point. Don't muddy the waters here. This isn't the hill to run up on, but they didn't listen. But you got something done.
We did. We made a movement on it.
Yeah.
Still could go further.
I'm going to dive right back into the text club here because they're filling in. They want some questions answered and some advice given. Tyler, where was the need to raise taxes if we had a $17 billion surplus and the money they spent is all one-time funding? Then why do they need more money to run the state? I throw that one your way.
Sure. Well, a lot of the surplus was one-time surplus money. About $12 billion of it was like from the federal government. So it was one-time money. So if you do, and that's why, the governor had proposed giving back the checks as a way, because that's a one-time refund on one-time money. So when you get down to what the actual, structural part of that wasn't one-time money, it's closer, to about $5-6 billion is stuff that's not one-time money. And so so we've got $4 billion worth of tax cuts in there too as well. So there is, there were some programs. There's things that we've kind of been in a log jam for years, and there's been some things that we think we want to do as a state, like providing meals for students and setting up paid family medical leave and, providing health care to people and a huge investment to an early childhood education. So everybody says this is our number one thing is workforce. Chamber of Commerce comes and says, hey, yes, childcare is our number one thing for getting people back into the workforce. So we've invested money in there. So there were a lot of investments in there, but there are tax cuts in here. But yes, there are some increases in some areas because the need was great. And again, it's because it's one-time money. You're trying to balance that one-time money without, tilting off into a deficit sometime in the future.
Acknowledging that $12 billion or approximately was from the feds is important because there's lawmakers on this side of the river that want to claim that they were the ones that were handing out everything when, in fact, it was federal dollars that they don't want to acknowledge. More messages in at 35270. Tyler, why is gas tax money wasted on light rail? There's no benefit for average citizens to pay in. So they're asking about the light rail. I assume it's the Duluth to the Twin Cities area.
Well, there is. All right. So there's some money for that Southwest light rail line in the Twin Cities. And there is also, yes, they're going to develop a train line from Duluth to Minneapolis. So here's the deal on that. There is this ton of money from the federal government for railroads. And so about 80% of that project will be paid by the federal government. So for a small investment by Minnesota, we get a huge federal investment into our transportation system for this rail system. That's also good jobs to build that rail system out and to increase our rail network across the country.
Well, and to an argument like that, I mean, one could be from, southeast Minnesota saying, well, why am I spending money for an underpass that's sorely needed in Moorhead, Minnesota, for example. Right. And I know you had to work hard to get that thing done.
We did. And so I'll come circle back to that. So first of all, Minnesota has the fourth largest number of roads in the country. We are fourth. And so we have a lot of road miles to invest in. And so it takes money. One thing, if you go out and you talk to farmers who farm on both the North Dakota, Minnesota side of the border, they will tell me that I can get into the fields 2 weeks earlier in Minnesota because we have gravel roads and they're mud on the North Dakota side. So that's an investment in roads that has a direct payoff because 2 weeks for a farmer, that's pretty good. Yeah. Pretty good to get in earlier. Uh-huh. Yes. So the underpass in Moorhead, that is in the transportation bill. So the project approved by the DOT, it's had money set aside. Moorhead set aside money. It came up because of inflation and one of the property buyouts. It came up about $10 million short. So that means if the state didn't step in, we were going to get special assessment on people in.
That's a dirty word.
In there on that. So we got the chair of transportation, not a big fan of earmarks, specifically carving out. He prefers here's the pool. Let the DOT decide where that should be the best use. But we did get a special mark in. For Moorhead for the $10 million for the underpass.
Well, and we applaud that for being done. And Barnesville, I know, got some roads too, as far as infrastructure dollars that are coming. So, what I keep circling back to this because I understand why a question like that comes in, but also we took home some pork too in this area.
Yeah. And a lot of the transportation money gets spent in greater Minnesota. So yes, in the Twin Cities, they feel like some of theirs, they want a lot towards a light rail system. That's going to go towards that.
I wanted to ask about the public safety measures as well. There was some debate, of course, that got heightened because of some of the additions that were put in, I think, in conference committee, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, about red flag laws and some of the other, I would say, gun measures, but dollars in there as well. Just talk about the public safety bill as a whole for me.
Sure. So there's three. This is actually in the tax bill, but we have $300 million set aside for public safety, basically block grants to communities. So Moorhead will get about $1.2 million, and it's up to Moorhead to decide what they want to do with it. And, Detroit Lakes, Dilworth, Barnesville, they're all going to get some money too. Up to you. Do you want to use it on fire department? Do you want to upgrade equipment? However you see fit to use that money. Police, fire, ambulance, whatever you think. We think there's a need there because that's a core government function. Mm-hmm. And quite frankly, I know police-wise in Moorhead, we're having trouble, recruiting and retaining officers. And we're down about 6 officers. And it's a perennial problem. If we can use some of that money towards that, that's up to the city council to figure that out. But I think that's a great thing. On the judiciary side, so yes. So the House passed background checks and also ERPO, or the red flag. That was in the House bill. The Senate did not have that in the bill. When it went to conference committee, they took the House position on that, and then it came back to the Senate. And I had said, I ran on background checks. So I was actually okay on the background checks. And even then, when that bill started, there were a lot of us in the Senate, we were like, we don't like the way this is worded and how it works. So the background checks got tweaked, scaled back, made better. On the same thing on the red flag laws. There were things about that we didn't like. That got scaled back, made into a better bill. So I did, in the end, I did support those two. And it was always that red flag, ERPO.
Mm-hmm.
That's always a tough one for me, because it does weigh a little bit more probably on honest gun owning citizens, people who are not committing crimes. But if it catches some of these people who possibly could, and it's also the number one cause of suicide is by gun deaths, and this can help definitely in that department. So some of the research that I had read on, and just some of the things that happened in the news, and there were a lot of other gun bills that were, I'll use it for wackadoodle, and I said
no.
I'm a firm no on that, and they never saw the light of day because there were enough of us that just said, no, we can't do that.
Well, I think if you look at general polling, I mean, the vast majority of the public's there with you on this. I mean, I can look at Michigan, for example, where you have Gretchen Whitmer, a Democrat in that state, and that's a gun-owning citizenry, but they overwhelmingly have supported her and that legislature with some of these type of measures getting passed over in Michigan. So if they can do it, I think maybe Minnesota can as well. This one's directed towards me, but I'm going to add, it comes around to you.
Okay.
Rob Kupec's my guest, by the way, for just tuning in, State Senator, District 4. Tyler, I know you were opposed to public funding for private schools in North Dakota, and I agree with you, but in Minnesota, they did something very similar with public funding for post-secondary education, college. Just being benefiting a different group, please ask the senator to justify giving free college for some, but limiting based on income. There were already grants and scholarships available based on income. I don't agree with funding college for anyone, but if I'm going, and this goes on, I'm going to be taxed on it, then my daughter should benefit from it as well. Were you able to follow along?
I think so.
Okay.
Let me tell you how the program works. So Minnesota has always had a grant program, and it's given out to students. It's students, so they decide where they're going. They can use that grant program. A lot more of the grant money has gone towards private colleges and universities because their tuition is traditionally higher than state institutions. So we did up the amount going to those grants. We have a very healthy private college system in Minnesota. We have a lot of private colleges. They serve a unique niche want of students. So we want to make sure they're okay too. They've seen declining enrollment as well as their tuition has gone up. On the other side, we put in, and I was on the higher ed committee, and actually the chair of higher ed came and he said, I would like to fund free college tuition at all the state schools for everybody. And I said, really? How much is that going to cost? I said, that's got to be a huge price tag. And he came back with the price tag, and it was surprisingly nowhere near as expensive. I was assuming it would be in the billions, and it was not. It did get in conference with the House. They had a different position. It got scaled back. So now any family income under $80,000, you can go to a 2-year, 4-year school in Minnesota. Your tuition is covered up to 120 credits, and it's a last dollar thing. So you got to apply for all the federal grants you can get, and then Minnesota will pick up the rest. You got to pay for housing stuff. That's still on you.
Sure.
But it is that tuition. And we put a cap on tuition because what we don't want is some school to go, oh, okay, they're going to pay for everything. We'll jack it up.
Yeah.
And so there's a cap on tuition.
Maybe be over the line. I don't know. We're going to see where that line's drawn because it will be legal for recreational marijuana in Minnesota. Final couple of minutes I have with State Senator Rob Kupec. You got her done?
Yeah. It was that bill there's 20 committees. It had to go through 16 committees in the Senate. So everybody, I think I saw it 3 times. Funny, I didn't see it in higher ed. That was the only one I didn't see it in. But it has changed a lot since January. The one thing, there was a group of us in Greater Minnesota who we said, look, this is going to have an impact on local governments. They're going to need to pay for this. They should get some of the tax revenue from this. So then 20% of the tax that we are putting on cannabis will go to local governments because they're going to have a cost implementing this, and we don't want to be an unfunded mandate on them.
I applaud that a lot because I think there's a lot of mandates that are unfunded that go from the state, whether it's St. Paul, Bismarck, you pick, and then all of a sudden, well, we got her done, and then it's on someone else's plate, and then all of a sudden it's not meeting what your expectations were because the money's not there.
Right.
So when does this become effective? Because everyone's like, hey, I was saying tongue-in-cheek, Willie Nelson's going to be in town. It's just going to be legal ahead of time. And, of course, that's not the case except for the THC from hemp. But people are wondering, hey, when?
It's August 1st is the start date. But you probably won't see retail places set up until probably a year and a half. It's going to take a little bit of time to build out that retail infrastructure. But I want to say that, this bill was done the right way. We looked at a lot of the other states. We saw what they did right. We saw what they did wrong. And we tried to make sure we weren't going to do that. We also really tried to make sure that it's a Minnesota industry. We don't want big cannabis coming in from other states and dominating. Yes. So there's a lot of provisions in there to make sure that it's homegrown.
Yeah, you stay down in Colorado. We'll take care of our own up here. And I think one thing that when I was following along with the debate of making sure that the tax is in that sweet spot. I remember last time I visited with you because you overtax and then guess what? They're going to the black market. So you're comfortable where the spot is right now.
We are. It's going to be, in addition to the regular sales tax that'll be on it, it'll be a 10% tax. And again, 20% of that will go back to local governments. Other states are much higher than that, what they tax it at. So I think we've landed in that sweet spot.
State Senator, I'm getting compliments in here. Tyler thanks Senator Kupec for his time, work, and thinking process behind support of moving the state of Minnesota forward. I emailed you a bit during the session from the Elmwood Township. Final question he asked for thoughts on sports betting next session.
Boy, I tell you, that was that bill that would not die, but that in the end did die. Some of it has to do with the horse racing tracks and wanting to make them whole with the sports betting. It looked like it wasn't going to happen. Then it looked like it was coming back. My seatmate in the Senate, Senator Klein, was the one carrying that bill. It'll be back, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I have no doubt. That's the one that just keeps on getting another life. Tyler, I'm a school board member in Minnesota. I applaud free school meals for all. Kids can't learn if they are hungry. Tyler, finally, if all politicians were as honest and straightforward as Rob, we could get things done again. Fantastic explanations. There's more that goes on and on here. Final word goes to you in the minute I've got left here.
Sure. And I want to say, one of the things you'll hear is that, if you look at a lot of the votes, they were right along kind of those party lines on a lot of votes when they came to the floor. But what you miss is that the behind the scenes in committees and just negotiating with people from both sides of the aisle, how that got incorporated into those bills. And I think that it really was a good, we worked together on this. And I will credit leadership a lot in the Senate. They did not bring anything out to the floor that they knew they were not going to get passed. So they get a lot of credit, I think, for their handling of the 34 slim majorities.
Well, you made some news locally, but of course nationally they saw what you got done, and they say, "Wow, if Minnesota can do it, look out." State Senator Rob Kupec, it's always fun. We'll do this again soon. All right,
sounds good.